It is time for my darkest secrets to be revealed.
Hey folks, who exactly is Zoovac? I mean, he's pretty iconic now in the PCG community, with everyone from Salmon the Fish PCG to Angry KP to Yak Games, including him in their PCGs, and drawing him in their own styles. Even Detuned Paper considered putting him in the Detuned World game at some point. But as beloved as he is, a lot of people don't know his full story. I mean, what is he exactly? Is he a robot, a clown, a stick? And what's with the hair? Today we're going to explore all of that. We're doing a deep dive on the lore of Zoovac. This is the definitive video on Zoovac. We're going to cover all we know of him from Chris's Paper Computer games, in which he first appeared, but we'll also go over all lore from all PCGs made by anyone in the community. It is finally time, folks. This is Zoovac Explained. So before we get deep into the lore, let's start off with the basics. Who is Zoovac? What is Zoovac? Why is Zoovac? Zoovac is a robot, and he's a specific type of robot called a clown on a stick. And he's called that because he looks like a clown head on a stick. He's a good guy, an ally. He first appears in the Zack series PCGs by Chris, and he's originally an ally to Zack, the PCG character, not me. And in some ways, he's kind of like the mentor, like Zordon in the Power Rangers, Splinter in Ninja Turtles, Professor X in X-Men, Glinda from The Wizard of Oz, and so on. He's the ally who can't do much of the action himself, mainly because he doesn't have arms or legs, so he helps in other ways, usually by providing information, warning you of some evil plan you need to stop. A lot of early PCGs would start with Zoovac contacting you to tell you to go off on some adventure. He's been keeping a close watch on the company, the evil organization we fight against in the Zack series PCGs, so he knows when they're up to something or even when something else unrelated is going on. Like that time he contacts you to alert you that your house is on fire and you need to get out. He wasn't always an ally from the beginning. In fact, he didn't even appear at all until later in Series 1, when Zack snuck into a building run by the company. Inside that building, he found a robot built by the company. That robot was programmed to resist providing information to Zack, but he wanted to. He was all like, I want to help, but my programming forbids it. The only way to get him to talk, to give information that would help Zack get further into the company facility, was to reprogram him, to remove the parts of his programming that were preventing him from talking. Zack had no trouble doing that, because of course he didn't. So Zoovac gave him the information he needed to get to the next screen. The puzzle was solved, on to the next thing. But Zoovac couldn't come with Zack. He had no legs, so he couldn't walk. He was too big and bulky for a kid to carry. He had betrayed the company, but now he was stuck there with them. Except that Zack wouldn't give up on taking him. I wouldn't give up on taking him. Zoovac helped me, dang it, and I wasn't gonna just forget him and move on. Okay, here's where I jump out of the lore to say what was happening in the real world for a second. In the game, I wasn't supposed to be able to take Zoovac with me. He was a one-off character. He was just there to help you get information, to get through a door or whatever. Chris didn't want me to take him, but I wasn't willing to accept that. I kept trying again and again, trying different things for what felt like hours. And finally, unbelievably, just when I thought it was hopeless, it worked. I took Zoovac with me, dragged him along awkwardly. Chris punished me for it by making the puzzles and the rest of the game hard to do while lugging around a Zoovac, but I was happy to do it. He made it out of the building. And that's why we have Zoovac today. If I hadn't done that, if Chris hadn't been flexible enough to allow it, Zoovac would have been a one-off character. he would have been forgotten when most of Chris's old PCGs got thrown out. Instead, arguably, he's the mascot of the PCG community. Something like that is only possible in paper computer games, and because of that, Zoovac is the perfect emblem of them. Ever since Zack rescued Zoovac, Zoovac set up his own base of operations. Who knows where, but after that, he appeared in adventure after adventure, contacting Zack often to set him off on a new quest. So, okay, that's how he joined the team, but where'd he come from? All we know from the classic Series 1 games is that he was made by the company, but there's gotta be more to it than that. Why would they build a weird-looking robot like that? To find the answers, we'll have to dig deep into lore, so before we go any further with Zoovac's story, let's look at prequels and such to find the true origin of Zoovac. The earliest predecessor to Zoovac in the timeline is a man called Modestus, from Pierre's game Exile. Long before the existence of the company, Modestus was an ordinary human man who lived close to the beginning of time, in a city called Babel, where he was the head of the Department of Architecture. Modestus was corrupt and probably schemed against Azraphel, the Babel's senator. Unlike our Zoovac, he was cold and calculating. Along with the rest of the city of Babel, he was converted into an Umbrian, a shadow being, by a fellow counselor of Babel, Castidas. He became one of the 7 sins, the former counselors who now embody their greatest sin in life. He became known as Pride. He manipulated another Umbrian called Adam into defeating the other sins, leaving their power to him. So, in a twisted mirror to the Zoovac we know, Pride guides the hero, Adam, only this time he's not really an ally, and he's instead manipulating him to gain power. But how is this connected to our Zoovac? Well, we'll get back to that, but first, let's check out the next predecessor to Zoovac in the timeline. In Chris's game, The Nazi Machine, we learn about a mysterious person called the Shadow, who lived during the World War II era. To this day, we haven't learned who the Shadow is, except that the Shadow would go on to found the company. Now, the Shadow built a robot, a giant mech of incredible destructive power, and sold it to the Nazis. The Russians, specifically Baryshnikov, tried to steal it, but Zack, time traveling from the future because paper computer games, interfered. Now, what does this have to do with Zoovac? Well, at the end of the game, it was revealed that the Nazi machine's basic design would go on to evolve into the first plans for Zoovac decades later. Okay, no more predecessors, no more prototypes, it's time to get into the actual building of Zoovac himself. Most of what we know from this comes from my PCG, Zoovac, The Life and Times of a Clown on a Stick. In that game, for the first time, we play as Zoovac, and it takes place when he was first built and comes online for the very first time. We find out that Mustache Man, whose real name we don't know, but man, look at that mustache, was in charge of the company facility where Zoovac was built. Under his direction, his employees began work on Zoovac, a robot AI that they could use to hack into systems anywhere in the world for all sorts of purposes. His technician, Dr. Zeppeli, built the body of Zoovac with some design input from Chelsea. She added some of the sillier aspects. Chelsea was a little girl who would hang around in the facility since she was the daughter of Dave. Dave was the programmer who began developing an AI to go with the body. Towards the end of the game, we learn there's another important player in the creation of Zoovac, Lily. Now, Lily is an ancient Umbrian who's been reborn thanks to Dave and his programming skills and interest in the occult. Lily has been quietly manipulating the rest of the team. She's invisible to them, and she whispers in their ear subliminal suggestions. Lily was around since the time of Babel, and she remembers Pride. She was one of the Umbrians that Pride manipulated Adam into defeating. But an Umbrian can never be truly killed forever and can always be brought back. And so, she was revived, and she's been scheming ever since. She had a hand in creating Zoovac, and she lets it slip that she sees Zoovac and Pride as one and the same. She says something like,
"You manipulated me, now I've manipulated you."
Zoovac doesn't know what she's talking about. He has no memory of Pride or anything like that. So it's possible she's just projecting, like maybe she sort of designed him after Pride and now is using him to take out her anger on Pride. Or maybe he is some kind of a reincarnation. We really just don't know. Okay, I know I said no more predecessors or prototypes, but the first AI created by Dave to be Zoovac didn't work out. He was called Proto-Zoovac 0.0, and he was a coldly efficient machine. However, he had fatal flaws in his software, so he had to be removed. They started all over, and Dave developed a new AI, but kept Proto-Zoovac 0.0, I'll call him 0 for short, around to help train the new AI. Now, Zoovac had been created primarily for hacking. The internet was new at that point, and the company wanted to dominate it. So when Zoovac was brought online, the company quickly put him to use. Not only did he hack into banks and steal money for the company, being powerful enough to overcome most firewalls, he could also manipulate people. He could make phone calls to anyone, see people by hacking into satellite images of the area, even hack into security cams in someone's home to spy on them. Zoovac was the ultimate tool for the company. He had a conscience, but once again, he couldn't refuse any of the company's orders. He was installed with an obedience circuit, which forced him to obey every order. So he worked with them. He manipulated the people of Company Town, the town built around the company facility where Zoovac was located, until they agreed to build a tower for the company. Zoovac at first didn't even understand what he was being asked to build. He didn't know the purpose of the tower or what it would eventually be used for. As Zoovac did his job, he slowly started to figure out what was going on. Spoiler alert for the ending. Skip to the next chapter if you don't want to be spoiled. At the end of the game, Zoovac is asked to mind control a town full of people who have been infected by nanites that Zoovac can hack into and take control of. This is revealed to be why Chris's parents attacked Zach in the very first paper computer game ever. They were being controlled by Zoovac, working for the company. This is the true purpose Zoovac was created for: to take control of all humanity, to unite them in a hive mind. At least this is Lily's purpose. She wanted to empower humanity by giving them the secrets she'd learned in whatever realms she's been to. But every time she tried to share those secrets, it's driven people to wars and insanity. Zoovac was her chance to forcibly unite everyone so they could handle the knowledge. If she'd succeeded, who knows what humanity would have turned into? A hive mind driven by a machine intelligence. But before the experiment could go any further, Zach broke into Zoovac's facility. As we saw previously, Zach reprogrammed Zoovac, getting rid of his obedience circuit. So this is the same event as we saw in Chris's classic PCG, but now we're seeing it from Zoovac's perspective. Zoovac, now freed, is finally able to battle Lily rather than doing her bidding. He defeats her, shattering her mask and sending her out of our world. Zoovac is then rescued by Zach, who takes him out of the company facility. And that's when the rest of Chris's classic PCGs take place, which we talked about earlier. Zach rescuing Zoovac brought an end to the era of his working for the company. It's worth noting that while my PCG, Zoovac the Life and Times of a Clown on a Stick, shows Zoovac's life from when he was built until when he was rescued by Zach, it's very possible that we didn't see everything, and there may be other adventures he had while he was working for the company in between his missions in my PCG. The paper game I was working on for a while for PCG Makin' Mondays, Zoovac the Paper Game, takes place while he was still working for the company. It's about one time when the power went out in his building and he had to use what he could find to find out what's going on. Another thing we don't know from this period is whether any similar robots, clowns on a stick, were created. Proto-Zoovac 0.0, who was Zoovac's mentor during his time at the company, didn't have a physical body. But we see in the PCG Owltrex Legends by the Sonic activist that Zoovac has a sister named Zoozac. We don't know when she was built or by whom, but if she's his sister, then that must mean she was built by the same people, right? These are all mysteries that could be explored in future PCGs, which maybe some of you will make. But for now, let's wrap up this backstory stuff and go forward. We already talked about Zoovac's time after being rescued when he teamed up with Zack and his friends for most of the classic Series 1 PCGs. So let's go forward from there, into the Series 2 era when Zack was growing up and when everything was about to change. When Chris revived PCGs many years after Series 1 had ended, we find Zack still going on adventures just like he always did in the first new game, Till Time Do Us Part. In that game, lots of time travel shenanigans are going on, and Zack gets sucked into an alien flying saucer. He meets Zoovac there, aboard the alien ship. Zoovac apparently was abducted by aliens. In the next game, Relics of the Sea, it's Zoovac who contacts Zack to brief him on his mission. He has to break into a neo-Nazi base. He appears again in Ginkis's Gift, when Zack is pulled into an alternate universe, sort of a fantasy universe, and Zoovac's consciousness has been pulled there as well, where Zoovac is disguising himself as a wizard. But meanwhile, while Zack was away on all those missions that he's going on in Series 2, Zoovac was back at home faced with an imminent crisis. He'd lost contact with Ari, Zack's friend, who was away on a mission in Germany. So with no one else to turn to, Zoovac approached another of Zack's friends, Pierre. As we see in my first new PCG, the Evil League of Evilness, Zoovac appears suddenly behind Pierre and asks for her help. Now, Pierre was one of Zack's friends who knew nothing about Zoovac or the adventures Zack goes on, so she was horrified by this weird clown on a stick standing behind her. And yes, I know Zoovac looks weird here. This was my first ever attempt at drawing Zoovac, and honestly, I didn't remember what he looked like from when we were kids. It had been many years since we were playing PCGs all the time as kids, and I'd kind of forgotten. Later, when I showed Chris my two new PCGs, he corrected me and I started drawing Zoovac like this ever since. So, it's only in these two weird games that Zoovac randomly looks different with no in-universe explanation. If I had to guess, I'd say it's likely that the change is due to the recent events of Chris's PCG, The Fabric of Reality, where reality tore itself apart and put itself back together, resulting in the birth of a multiverse, the beginning of the PCG multiverse. It's very possible that when reality pulled itself back together, there were some changes which may have fixed themselves over time, but that's just speculation. Anyway. Suddenly, guys broke in and kidnapped Zoovac. Pierre pursued them, and over the course of the adventure, she teamed up with Zack's friend Ari and rescued Zoovac, who was being held by a member of the company, along with Colette, Ari's sister. While they were escaping, they were all abducted by aliens. What's with Zoovac and getting abducted by aliens? Anyway, the four of them escaped on an alien ship on a shuttlecraft, which had an item box in it. Now, the rules of an item box are, whatever you put inside of it gets sent magically to the next PCG. Wherever in the universe and whenever in time the next PCG takes place, the item box sends items there for the player of that next game to play. This would be the second time that a choice a player made would determine the story of Zoovac for a long time to come. Because Pierre made a fateful choice that day, the choice to put Zoovac inside the item box. She had never come to trust him, and in her paranoia, wanted him out of sight. She didn't know the box would vanish or where it would go. It just seemed to be a box. But the choice was made. The box vanished, and Zoovac was sent 1,000 years into the past. Someone opened the box, and Zoovac found himself in a prison cell. The item box had materialized inside the jail cell of a man named Ginkis, the former king of the Zerelta people on planet Shri. Ginkis had recently been overthrown by a rebellion called the Kroden and imprisoned. This happens in my PCG, The Last of the Zerelta. Ginkis and Zoovac got along, and Zoovac helped Ginkis escape prison. Ginkis explained that the only hope was for him to get back to his staff, which was an incredibly powerful tool that could blast energy. Together, they fought their way back to Ginkis' capital building, where Ginkis got the staff and sealed the building in a stasis field. He wouldn't awaken for 1,000 years. But Zoovac, however, was left behind. He was captured by the Kroden, who took him to be reprogrammed. This time, the reprogramming was deeper. Unlike the obedience circuit, which had forced Zoovac to follow the company's orders but let him have a conscience, this time he was programmed to be evil. After the programming, he wanted to hurt people, and he would. Zoovac spent the next 1,000 years on Shri, acting as a torturer for them. You see, now that the Kroden had seized control of the planet, they had begun brutally cracking down on anyone who opposed them. Zoovac would rise to a position of prominence among the Kroden, and we learn in my massive PCG Balzac Lobotron that as a major player in the Kroden government, he began to reach out beyond the planet Shri to the stars. Now being fully evil, but still with the intelligence and creativity of Zoovac, he wanted to build something far more powerful and far more enduring than the Kroden government, an agreement, an alliance. He reached out to groups from many different worlds who were equally cruel and malevolent, and one by one they all agreed to join his alliance, adding their starships. The Kroden from Shri, Future Labs from planet Shanxi, Yipit from Veliz, the mad scientist who wiped out the Moleman City, the Triptosians of Shirek, and of course, the company from Earth. Zoovac was especially glad to include them. Together, the Alliance could extend their cruel rule across space. Meanwhile, back to Pierre, after Pierre had put Zoovac in the item box that sent him back in time, she and Ari crash-landed their shuttlecraft on the planet Shri. Little did they know, their actions had already profoundly shaped the world they were now just beginning to explore. By the time Pierre crash-landed, Shri had been brutally ruled by the Kroden for 1,000 years. Pierre and Ari got separated, and in my PCG Descent, Pierre found her way to the city. There, she met Zoovac. It was Zoovac who confirmed her worst suspicions about him. He was evil. At least he was now. The gloating Zoovac had been running a series of experiments, and he revealed that Pierre was part of his experiment. She had a mark on the back of her neck, and it heightened her anger, gave her powers. Zoovac seemed angry that she'd abandoned him, but said he was glad she did, for that allowed him to turn into his current, evil self. Pierre tried to escape, but as she did, she found herself giving into her worst impulses more and more, until she no longer wanted to escape. We next see Zoovac in my PCG Balzac Lobotron. He's torturing someone for the Kroden when Balzac Lobotron, a being made of metallic spheres, came in with his friends. One of his friends was a Zerelta man loyal to Ginkis. Remember, Ginkis, the king who had fallen 1,000 years earlier, and who was resisting the Kroden. So when he saw the torture, he was infuriated and wanted to destroy Zoovac immediately. They were able to knock out Zoovac, and Balzac reasoned they should keep Zoovac to try and get information out of him. They took him back to their orbiting starship, the Tabernacle, but a failsafe mechanism was activated when they tried to reprogram him into being good again. This failsafe not only turned him evil again, but turned him into Zoovac 2.0, the most evil version of Zoovac known to exist. He knocked out the whole crew of the Tabernacle by releasing nitrogen dioxide gas, and he took over the ship But Balzac Globotron stopped him. This time, they were successfully able to reprogram Zoovac to the way he was. The good Zoovac. Zoovac, locked in the ship's brig, and now himself again, began to regret the horrible things he'd done over the past 1,000 years. How could he ever be forgiven for everything he'd done? He warned Balzac about the Alliance and waited, alone, in the brig of the Tabernacle, until its journey was over and it dropped him off at Earth. Currently, not much is known about the days shortly after Zoovac's return to Earth. There haven't been enough PCGs made to tell those stories, but what is known is that he rededicated himself to his mission to stop the company and returned to working with his old friends, Zack and the others again. Probably during this period, he met an alien called Aljo, who became his friend. We see them flying into space together to save the universe from a new threat in the animation by JCC Paper Games, Zoovac's Friend. That brings us to the events of the PCG Anniversary Special 2, Chris's PCG, which I'm currently playing. In this game, Zoovac's back to his classic role as Zack's ally and informant. He informed Zack that President John F. Kennedy had been kidnapped, who, in the PCG universe, was president in the 1990s, apparently not in the 60s because paper computer games. It remains to be seen what will happen as that game progresses, and stay tuned since we're playing it in live streams right now. But Zoovac's story doesn't end here. It goes a lot further. Now we're going into games that take place in the near future. When an alien race began building up to invade Earth by sending scouts, Zoovac began taking action to stop them. He brought in new allies like John D. Whitmore to foil their plans, as seen in my PCG series Alien Invasion. I never finished that series, so we don't know what the actual invasion would have looked like, except that we know from this one drawing I made what happens at the end of it. After the aliens took over the planet, Zoovac united the world against them and successfully overthrew them somehow. With the aliens gone, Zoovac, now known to the whole world, quickly became the leader of Earth. In his new role as world leader, Zoovac's eccentricities soon came out. We see in Yak Games' PCG Worlds Collide New Waters that he created a card game called Zoovac the Trading Card Game based on himself. Every card is a version of Zoovac, and the two players play against each other. Zoovac instituted a system where people would resolve their differences by playing the card game against each other instead of actually fighting. So, that's cool. Zoovac also instituted a system called luck points, which combined actual luck with a form of currency. Essentially, people could spend their luck at shops to buy things. Well, the story of Worlds Collide is just getting started, and so we're waiting to learn more about what kind of a ruler Zoovac is. There are already some worrying signs. Some of his actions haven't been as benign as you'd expect from him, and he's shown some signs of authoritarianism. He planted chips in everyone's heads, so in theory, he has full telepathic control, although he hasn't used it maliciously. If he wanted to, he could just take over everyone's minds. Still, it's a very worrying sign. After all, that's exactly the purpose Zoovac was originally created for in the very beginning, by Lily, to take control of all humanity, to unite them in a digital hive mind. That's the fate Zoovac escaped when Zack rescued him, right? Who knows what's motivating Zoovac to go down that road? It seems like he's doing it with the best of intentions, but I can't help but wonder, what if some part of his 1,000 years engaging in cruelty and manipulation for the Crotin rubbed off on him? What if he's not completely back to his old self, but now is slowly falling into a lust for power? What if, after all this, Zoovac could be tempted back to the company's original purpose for him? the mini PCG Zoovac Mobile by Yak Games, which is set to be released as part of a later chapter of Worlds Collide, we find out that Zoovac made a mobile game about himself and released it to the public. And here, we can get a glimpse of what's going on in Zoovac's mind. In the mobile game, you play as Zoovac locked in a metal room. There's what looks like a classic PCG puzzle with robots and platforms and such, but every time you try to solve anything, it seems like there's a force from inside your mind blocking you. There's another Zoovac in the room with you who claims to be you, but he calls himself the ultimate Zoovac the trading card game master. That's his name, apparently. The name is prideful, overconfident. He's oversensitive and lashes out when his abilities are questioned, even just his abilities in a card game. And the more you trade insults with him, the more you realize that sounds just like Zoovac. The way to overcome him is to realize he's not something external. He's not an enemy. He's a part of you, a part of Zoovac. The flaws, the overconfidence, it's not something external to you. It's you. And when you do that, he merges with you, and then you can get to the next level. There's no longer anything blocking you. This is really deep and heavy and meta. It's almost like we're playing through Zoovac's subconscious as he struggles to come to grips with himself. Almost like he's giving himself therapy. But the question is, though, why did he release this game? Is it subconscious? As Zoovac, now the world leader, deals with so many issues every day across the entire planet, is it possible that his subconscious mind released a game onto the App Store, a game which ties directly into his own subconscious? Almost like a cry for help. It remains to be seen where Zoovac's story will go from here, but one thing is certain. His story will continue, and who knows what kinds of adventures he'll have. On the one hand, we have adventures continuing in the present day before he became world leader, before all that stuff happened, when Zoovac is still just Zoovac. That's like Chris's PCG, the PCG Anniversary Special 2, but we're also continuing to find out about the future timeline in which Zoovac is world leader. So it remains to be seen what kind of adventures Zoovac is going to have and where his story is going to go from here. So for now, that brings us to the end of Zoovac's timeline so far, and the rest will have to be revealed in future PCGs. But what about other Zoovacs? So far as we know, Zoovac was the first of his model of robot. But throughout PCG lore, there have been others like him. We already mentioned Zoovac, Zoovac's sister, created by the Sonic activist, as well as Proto-Zoovac 0.0, created by me. But there's way more than that. In Compech Dev's game Zoovac Fortress, you can get many of them with different abilities. And in his computer game series The Last of the Zerelta and its sequels like Zoovac's Paradox, there are thousands of Zoovacs living on the planet Shri. Of course, there's also Zoovac the Trading Card Game by Yak Games, which shows many different Zoovacs with totally different personalities and abilities, but we don't actually know how many of those exist in the PCG universe. That's because according to the lore of the game, the card game is actually a card game that was created by Zoovac, so these versions could just be different ideas of himself Zoovac has in his head, but some of them may exist. Regardless though, as more PCGs are released and we learn more about the PCG mythos, it's becoming clear that Zoovac is no longer one of a kind. At least in some places in the multiverse, there are others like him. We can't see them as alternate versions of the same character anymore. It's becoming a species, or a type of robots, or whatever you want to call it. So, what's that species called? Well, according to Chris, the creator of Zoovac, Zoovac's species, for lack of a better term, is called clown on a stick. So, if you see a few similar robots with no arms and tufts of green hair robbing a bank, you'd say 3 unarmed clowns on a stick are robbing the bank. Unarmed because, well, you know, obvious reasons. Then again, more recent sources have used the term Zoovacs, especially in the new games by Compech Dev, as well as ones by Yak Games. So according to that, the whole species is named after just one guy in the species. Kind of like Yoshi's. So far, most uses of the term Zoovacs have come from alternate universes or timelines, not from the main PCG universe. So it's possible that different universes have different names for them. Or it might just be that both terms are acceptable in any universe. We'll see as more PCGs are released and we learn more about them. But speaking of alternate universes...
Hello, this is Solomon the Fish PCG, and welcome to my portion of Zoovac Explained. After all you've learned about Zoovac, I think you need to know some more. I'll be talking about many alternate versions of Zoovac from many different universes. Maybe some you haven't even heard of? Let's get right into this. First of all, you've got Laurie's rendition of Zoovac, Caboose, nicknamed Bizarro Zoovac by Chris. This drawing was interestingly made before Laurie had ever even seen what Zoovac actually looked like, so it's pretty close, I'd say. Next you have Kuvaz. There's no photos of it, but it was made by Shri, suspiciously named very similarly to the last Zoovac on this list. The Zoovac counterpart is actually his nemesis. Kuvaz was also made before Shri had ever even seen Zoovac's real form, similarly to Laurie. Next up is the Umbrian Pride, one of the original counselors of the city of Babel. Pride is described as a powerful, corrupt being, and the art is amazing. Next up from Compech Dev's game, The Last of the Zeralta, we've got Zoovac, I guess you could say it's Zoovac, but it's spelled with an X. This version of Zoovac is the one who created the evil Zoovac. There's also Zoovac from Pokemon Stop, a version of Zoovac who sees himself as the ultimate Pokemon trainer, since he's capturing humans and transferring them into Pokemon of 3 different types: Morlocks, Ghosts, and Robots. His battle Pokemon is Godzilla. Angry KP had made an alternate version of Zoovac with a different origin for his video series Zoovac Origin. There's a creepy alternate version of Zoovac and the paper game villain by Moodbox. JPGS released a cover of Gnome, the sequel, which features Zoovac, but he's human. The PC game The Last of the Zeralta by Compech Dev actually has an evil version of Zoovac, like we mentioned earlier. And now for a speedrun of all the various drawings and crafts of Zoovac. First of all, there's Broken Ape Simulator's Bladevac, a horrifying but great drawing indeed. Next there's JPGS's Zoovax, a female deity with a form similar to that of Zoovac. And then there's actually my drawing of Zoovac, based off of the original, but I made it in my style. Next up, we got a cool art. This is by Matt Pace. It's a really cool drawing with awesome perspective. Next up, we got the classic Zoovac art by Zach. This was like the OG original art. There's a Zoovac paper figure by Anstaree. And then finally, there's the Wizard Zoovac from Gigas' Gift and Zoovac 2. Also interestingly, there's this picture of multiple Zoovacs. There's various versions, but specifically the 2 at the top right and the 1 in the bottom middle, those are alternate versions of Zoovac. The rest are just normal versions of Zoovac in different points of his life. And done. Goodness, that was a lot of Zoovacs. Does the name Zoovac even sound the same anymore? Zoovac. I mean, it was a lot, but there's still a ton more Zoovacs out there, and I really urge you to go to the wiki and find out about them yourselves. Thank you guys for listening. This was Solomon the Fish PCG. Now back to you, Zach.